Mouth breather. This is what it looks like when I smile, which is probably one of the reasons why I don't smile very often. This is the third attempt I've made to say the general point of what I was getting at by discussing my experience of buying this incredibly crappy, cheap webcam. I went to a store that was far, far away. I walked several blocks from the bus to get to the store. I stood in line outside the store to be checked in and given a time when I was allowed to enter the store, and then I stood and waited for that time to arrive. Funnily enough, I actually complained to the guy waiting the front door, and he became so disgusted with my pointing out seemingly obvious facts, like the fact that the store was choosing to comply with CDC guidelines as opposed to having no choice but to do that, because the CDC guidelines are just guidelines and do not have any sort of authority backing them up. Eventually the guy got so disgusted with my sort of haranguing him with this truth that he didn't want to confront that he just said, "Go ahead, go into the store a couple of minutes early." So, that's at least the second time in my life that being obnoxious has gotten me my way. It's not a great way to engage with the world, but a lot of the ways that I'd rather go are not available to me for one reason or another. The world's a pretty suboptimal place, all told, which one of the reasons why I have historically always gravitated towards alternatives to reality, such as role-playing games, such as Mage the Ascension, which is more or less what this series has turned into me talking about, even though it's a super niche concept that doesn't resonate with very many people. If I were just vlogging about my daily life in the age of coronavirus, I might get more views, but that's not what I'm doing this for. Or I would put more effort into learning how to do a good job and learn video editing, learn how to do a proper setup. Anyway, I'm not here for that. This is something that I am doing because I wanted to do it, but I want to do it my way, whether that way works or not, because that's pretty much how I've chosen to live my life. Anyway, so the currently 3-part, rapidly moseying its way towards becoming a 4 or 5-part series if I don't shut up and get to the point, is about the intersection between the medical crisis of coronavirus, where the objective is to protect people's lives, and the financial repercussions thereof, where the objective is to get the economy moving again, and how neither of these is ultimately any sort of attempt at preserving human freedom, which is the main thing that I care about. I heard at some formative age during my childhood that America was all about the famous "Give me liberty or give me death" line from the Revolutionary War, and similar concepts and sentiments all throughout the early age of America up through at least the Wild West period. I've come to understand why it's not a great idea to romanticize that view of the past, and the life was pretty much shit back then, just as it's pretty much shit by now. By the way, this is a good time to point out that I say fucking shit on my channel a lot, so, you know, we're not age restricted here, we're not for children, we're for people who have a thick skin and a sense of maturity and are able to laugh at themselves and laugh at the world. And anyway, the point I'm trying to get to very circuitously here, we have this unpleasant reality, and I like to deal with unpleasant realities by looking at them through a fictional lens, so we might as well keep talking about the Technocracy from Mage the Ascension. We've discussed 2 of the 5 branches known as conventions that the Technocratic Union is a union among, and so we've mentioned the Syndicate, who are evil bankers, basically financial professionals of various sorts, and the progenitors are the evil doctors and drug dealers and so forth. And the third branch is known as Iteration X, and they are perhaps the strangest and most off-the-wall, far-out sci-fi aspect, which doesn't have a lot of resonance in real life. For the most part, they are cyborgs. They like to build machines and then attach machines to human body parts. There are a few less far-out sci-fi concepts in the group. Each of the branches of the Technocracy is further subdivided into sub-branches, and I'm not going to get too much into that because this is not a deep dive into the lore of Mage the Ascension. This is meant to vaguely talk about how that metaphor applies to reality, and so talking about the killer cyborgs that are going to come hunt your wizard character down, that's not very pertinent. So, I'm going to move right along. So, there are, as I said, Iteration X is mostly about killer cyborgs. They have some more subtle applications. One of their branches is called the Time Motion Managers, and the implication is that they basically invented the concept of, like, a schedule, getting an entire factory of workers to all keep time at the same rate so that the factory hums along smoothly. So that's a little less sci-fi, a little more like something that people actually do in real life. But the third aspect, besides the cyborg makers and the time motion managers, the third main subdivision of Iteration X is a interesting hybrid between the realistic and unrealistic take, and that's what I want to talk about now. The Statisticians. If you are anything like me, you don't really understand how statistics works, and it's kind of seems like sorcery when you hear it spoken about in any degree of depth. And I have a somewhat unpopular opinion, which a lot of people are probably going to call me a crazy flat earth conspiracy theorist for advancing this view, but I am of the opinion that statistics is, I will back off from the most radical version of my opinion, which is that it's complete and utter bunk, and I will simply say that it is exaggerated in how well it works, and a lot of people rely on it when they shouldn't, and trust statistics when they should be questioning the way in which the statistics were gathered and analyzed. But in any event, I like the contrast between the, as I said, they're called biomechanics who build cyborgs and staple machine parts onto living flesh. That's insanity, science fiction stuff. And at the other extreme, the time motion managers are basically just your boss at work. The statisticians are an interesting step between those because they are members of Iteration X who their particular version of technological wizardry is the calculation of statistics and the attempt to predict the future by analyzing data about trends from the past. And obviously, in the real world where we don't have magic powers, we can do a little bit of that. We can't do it with supernatural efficiency. But the way that it is a kind of incredibly mysterious quasi-sorcery to the layperson makes it an interesting halfway step to talk about. So, if you look at reality as starting from the assumption that we began in the 1990s with the makers of this game looking around at reality and looking for things that seemed quasi-supernatural and could be exaggerated into material to make a game about. They look at Bigfoot and they say, oh, okay, what if Bigfoot is secretly really a werewolf and we're gonna make a game about werewolves? That's a terrible example because werewolves are already a thing in mythology. But they would do that kind of thing. They would be like, what's the secret mystical explanation behind this mundane, ordinary thing? And so the Syndicate is a good place to play in that space because it is something that is both scientific and incredibly difficult to wrap your brain around, and very counterintuitive, very easy to find yourself tempted to doubt. encourage people to doubt things. I encourage people to look at what the official narrative that the news outlets, the government, the media, all of the official sources are telling you that you should believe this one thing. I encourage looking at another perspective on that, another way that you could look at how you should interpret your reality as being more than what you're being told it is. So, if you're being told coronavirus is ravaging the globe and everyone should be very scared and everyone should stay home and everyone should do what the government says, ask yourself why the government wants that. Ask yourself, these are self-serving politicians who have often been caught in a lie or found to be hypocritical in some way, like the classic example of the anti-gay senator who turns out to be having gay experiences in airplane bathrooms all along the campaign trail. We've had a lot of experiences like that, so we should all understand that the world is a very cynical place and we should not necessarily trust everything that our leaders tell us. So, Mage as a game is very much founded in that space. Even though your character is a wizard and can throw fireballs from your hand, the game isn't really about throwing fireballs from your hand. It's about changing the way you perceive reality, and it dates back to roughly the era that the movie The Matrix came out, and a few years before that, so the culture at that time was very much kind of thinking about the idea that reality is subjective and that your viewpoint on the world kind of changes the reality that you're living in, which is now an idea that Facebook regularly repeats in various forms. So, it's become kind of a popular, almost passé thing to think about, but the game about wizards was once kind of on the cutting edge of that perception of reality. So we have a reality in which sort of syndicate and sort of progenitors are duking it out, and sort of statisticians are looking at the numbers and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And we should not be too quick to assume that what they're doing is legitimate science, because the fact that we can't easily understand it means that it's very easy for them to use it as a way to lie to us. If they are not fully explaining exactly what they did and exactly why it should work, and if they're relying on jargon terms and expecting us to just go with what they're saying, we should not be so quick to go along with that, basically, is the point that I'm getting at.